Hey there, welcome to the More Miles podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Scott.
And Michelle is not here with us today. It is just Scott and I, and we have a special guest who's here with us today. We are very excited to welcome another guest to our podcast. I think he needs very little introduction if you are a fan of trail and ultra running. We are here today with Ryan Ploeckelman, and he is the Adventure Jogger. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here, Lauren and Scott. When I got Scott's email, like, hey, do you want to be on our podcast? I'm like, I never get asked to be the guest, right? I'm usually like asking the questions and just doing that work. And so I'm like, I need to see what life is like on the other side of the question.
Yeah, well, that's exactly why we wanted to have you on. We really love, we're huge fans of the Adventure Jogger and, even prior to the Adventure Jogger podcast, but we really love what you're doing is, interviewing the front, middle, and back of the pack. Mm-hmm. And that's just so cool that you have talked to, probably hundreds of runners at this point, from the best of the best in our sport to the dead freaking last in our sport. And there's just so many interesting stories to tell. But I think yours is one of those. And we don't often get to hear your story. You're the one asking the questions. So that's what we're here for. We want to hear your story behind the man behind the podcast. So you, at this point, you are such a huge figurehead, whether or not you like it, in the trail and ultra community and the podcast itself. So when did running enter your life? What drew you into the sport?
Well, I've been a runner essentially my whole life. When I was in middle school and high school, I was on the track team, but I was a sprinter. So, I did the 100 meters or the 200 meters, and then I did the 400 meters, and I do the various relays. So I do like the 4x1 and the 4x2 and the 4x4. And I always kind of liked running, but I always hated when coach had us go long. Like, I will never forget early, this probably my sophomore year. I don't know if we got Coach Furlong, who was my track coach and one of my life mentors, if we got him mad or something, but he's like, guess what we're doing today? We're running 3 miles. And I was like, you're insane. That I run at most a quarter of a mile. And he's like, guess what? Everyone's running 3 miles. And so he sent us on this 3-mile loop. And I was like, my God, why would anyone want to run longer than a lap around the track? And so went to state and all that stuff. But then high school ends, of course, and you go into your adult world. I was never good enough to run in college, ever. I was not that good, so there's no colleges knocking down my door. But by the way, in high school, I remember thinking the cross country kids were weird, but yeah, that's a whole other story. So I you step into adulthood, and for me, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but when you transition from being a kid to being an adult, you don't realize that when you are a teenaged boy, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and you will stay just as thin.
Yep.
You can't gain weight, and so you go through your whole high school career just shoveling food in your mouth. My mom would always tease us about having to buy 5 gallons of milk every single week because there was 3 of us teenage boys in the house. And, you get out of high school and, 5, 6, 7, 8 years into your 20s, you look and you go, whoa, when did I get fat? when did this happen? I have just been eating the same way I've been eating since I was in high school. And now I'm probably 80 pounds overweight, right? And so I was trying to think of, and my wife has always been, great and like encouraging me to go to the gym. And I would go to the gym every once in a while. And it wasn't until I think it was, I wanted to try and get in shape to do something. My brother, Darren, my younger brother, got into triathlons for a while. And so, when I got my mom saying, hey, your brother's doing another triathlon, I'm like, well, okay, mom, great, awesome. I can do one of those too. And so I signed up for a sprint triathlon, which, it's funny when you say triathlon, everyone assumes that they're like, wow, you swam 4 miles and you biked 100 and something and then you ran a marathon. No, I didn't do that one. I did the entry level one. And so I remember training for that, and really enjoying the running part of it. I hated the swimming. I was horrible at it. And you see the people that can breathe as they stroke, they just lift their head up and breathe. And I was like, I looked horrible. It was like so pathetic, doggy paddling the swim. I liked the bike was okay. But what I didn't like about the bike was you can buy your way to good times, right?
Yeah.
Like there is a huge barrier of entry in the world of cycling and in the world of triathlon cycling. And you got guys and gals that are on, $10,000-$15,000 bikes. And when you're on a $700 bike, it's not even the same. It's like it's two different things. Like one person is driving, an old beater Volvo, and you're racing against somebody in a brand new Ferrari. And it's just, I was like, that didn't sit right with me. But I love the running. And I remember finishing that triathlon and going, okay, well, what's next? And so I did the progression. I signed up for a half marathon, did a couple of half marathons, signed up for a marathon, did a couple of marathons. And then for whatever reason, I don't know if it was I was bored, wanted to read something, but somehow Dean Karnazes's book entered my world. And I read that book and I'm like, my God, this sounds so amazing. And I paired that with a marathon that I did. There was this old couple that were talking about a trail marathon that they did that was so brutal, and it was off road and it was in the mountains, in Middle Tennessee. And I asked them what it was, and I was like, I looked it up online. I'm like, oh my God, people run on trails. And so between finding out about, it was the Savage Golf Marathon, which still goes on, which is the most criminally underrated race in all of trail running. And then Dean Karnazes's book, I was like, there's a world beyond 26.2. And so I did the, 50K and 50-mile, thing. And then it was a drunken New Year's Eve. Because you guys both know this.
So many ultra stories begin.
So you guys have friends like this. You get mixed up in a running group, right? And the next thing you know, it's New Year's Eve. You've had way too many, and then your buddy encourages you to sign up for a 100-miler, and you do, and you finish it, and then you do another one, and then so that's kind of my story of how I got into running, and then ultra running.
So I read Dean Karnazes's book back in the day, and my reaction was, no, thank you. This sounds crazy. Crazy. Ordering pizzas in the middle of the desert in the middle of the night? What is this? So I think that's funny that attracted you to the sport. What about that? Because I mean, his book is really about it's about overcoming, but it's also about really suffering along the way. What about that was attractive to you?
When he ordered the pizza, I'm like, wait a minute, I can eat like a teenager again?
Okay.
But no, I thought it was interesting because, first of all, the trail thing was interesting because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with roads. And I do most of my running on roads just because that's what's available to me. But trail runs take you places that most people just don't go. Unless you're a long distance hiker. I mean, you think about these races out there, who really is going to hike 31 miles through a beautiful, some hollers and some mountains and some trails and some this and some that? Who's really going to get to experience that in a day? Or who's going to be able to, experience 100 miles or 50 miles in some rugged, remote areas? You're seeing things that people don't get to see very often, and you get to experience a space that is so far removed from the reality of your day to day, right? Like we generally don't go out, 15 miles from the nearest place to exit a trail and then still have so far to go. And there's very few people out there. So I think for me, when I did that trail run, the first one, the Savage Golf, I was just enamored with the beauty of it. And then it became a question of, okay, I don't know if I can get any faster, but can I go farther? And so the quest became, how far can I go before it falls apart, or will it? I don't know. It was just that it was the questions of the unknown of how far can I go and make this happen.
So it sounds like, I mean, hearing you start with the Savage Golf Marathon, that's a gnarly course. That's not just like an intro to trail marathon.
I didn't know. And do you guys remember when Anton Krupicka first hit this trail running scene?
Oh yeah. And
then the New Balance had the Minimus shoe, which had like basically a millimeter of foam with no rock plates. And I thought Anton Krupicka was God, which did not play well when I interviewed him later on in life. But I just thought, here's this guy. I'm this buttoned up, family man. Here's Trail Jesus who lives in his truck and just runs wherever, right? And so I had the original, and I still have it somewhere in my house. The original AK vest from Ultimate Directions, the red one with the hard bottles. I still have it, but I got the Anton Krupicka New Balance shoes, the plastic ones. Remember the ones they made out of plastic?
Yep.
Upper. That terrain was so horrible. Like it was so rocky and so rooty, and so rocks were sticking up everywhere, and those shoes offered zero protection. And my feet were destroyed at the end of that race.
I can imagine. So that almost leads into my overarching question are most of the races that you seek out really, is that your favorite way to do it? The really kind of rugged back. No.
And I always end up with it. And so like my running has definitely gone down quite a bit. I don't race nearly as much as I used to. But for whatever reason, when I do race, I'm like, why do I not sign up for some Rails to Trails? Like, did I not look at the course description and go, does it not say rocky, rooty, gnarly, technical terrain? I just so badly want to be able to not think about my feet and not have to avoid falling and breaking my arm on a rock. But for whatever reason, I always will sign up for something, and then I'll get there and I'll go, oh, come on, this was not in the course description, or it was farther along in the course description than I read.
So talking about gnarly trails, I think anyone who's listened to any episode of the Adventure Jogger, you are really big on promoting the East Coast and the trails we have over here and the trail runners that we have that are coming from here. So as gnarly as our trails are, what makes you so passionate about sharing, what we have on the East Coast and the runners that we have over here?
So it was years ago, and I was running with a friend of mine, and at that time, the podcast space for trail and ultra running was like 2 podcasts. That's it. You had the Ultra Runner podcast and you had Trail Runner Nation. And so, 10 Junk Miles started right before me, and they were basically Midwest. So, and I remember my buddy saying to me, like, they do not talk at all. I never hear anybody talking about races out east or interviewing runners from out east. It is just, hey, who ran the gnarly trail in California? Here's a runner from Colorado. Here's a runner from Arizona. And so he's like, you need to start a podcast that focuses on that. And so I didn't know, like, I was a little nervous about starting that on my own years ago. And so I got a partner, and then we launched the East Coast Trail and Ultra podcast. And we had, I think, 300 episodes of that podcast. And it ended in spectacular fashion, much like a blow up when you haven't been taking gels or eating, and you blow up at mile 70. It was about that epic. There was tears involved. It was great. And so, but I loved I love the people that I met, the races that I'd found out about, the race directors, the community of the East, and there seems to be this great chip on the shoulder of Eastern runners, that just don't seem to get the respect, and they're folks that don't exist in the spotlight and are a different type of runner. They tend to be a little less flashy and a little more hardworking and a little more blue collar. And so when I started the Adventure Jogger, I remember saying like, okay, I'm going to open myself up to everybody, but I still want to live in the space that I've been living in and kind of still letting people know like, hey, there's some great races over here and there's some great runners over here. Let's just not forget about the whole half of the United States.
I think you've been really, I don't know if you appreciate this about yourself, but I think that you have been really integral in bringing a lot of that attention to East Coast trails and the runners that are from here and the races that are here. I mean, I think we're seeing in the sport a little bit of a recognition of that starting to happen more in the UTMB races coming to the East, and we're getting a little bit more of that recognition. And I think you've been a big part of that, is just sharing and getting the people and the stories out there that are over here too on our gnarly, rooty, rocky trails.
You're far too kind. You give me way too much credit. I kind of look at myself as just the person who points you in the direction of the great people. Like here, I'm not the star. I'm the telescope pointing you and showing you the star. So, but thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah. Well, so to sort of shift subjects a little bit, you talked about, you have done 50K, 50 mile, 100 mile. You also have a day job and a family. So, I mean, tell us a little bit more about yourself off the run. You've got a lot. What do you do for a living, and how do you fit training and this side of you into your life?
So I work in radio, which I think was why my buddy's like, you got to do a podcast because you got that voice, right? Like you got to, why not? And it's something that I kind of had experience in. And so it's kind of in my wheelhouse. And so working in radio for the longest time, and I used to work way earlier than I do now. And so, 5 years ago, I was able to be out the door at work at, noon, and then I'd run all afternoon before I had to pick up the kids from school. And then life kind of changed. I kind of describe my rise through the ranks of work as I truly am an example of you can fail your way up. And so at some point they're like, do you want to be a manager? And I'm like, come on, did everyone else say no? So that kind of changed things. And now I'm kind of in this interesting space where when I used to have to get up at 2 a.m, I still get up early, but I run early. And so I've got my headlight on like most of the year running, early in the morning. I'll meet a friend of mine and we have these routes that we do out in these backcountry roads each morning. So it's different, but it's just as fun. But as far as like my family life, my wife, Christina, and I have been married for 23 years. We've been married that long.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we do okay. It's kind of fun. And we have 3 kids. My oldest is 21. My middle is 19, and my youngest is 17. So when I got into the sport, the kids were little, and now they're quite a bit older, and the house is quite a bit emptier. We just have one left at home, and so it's been fun to step back a little bit from racing and running and just enjoy this last one while she's in the house. And I've got no excuse. Once she goes off to college, when I pull back in the driveway after dropping her off at college next year, I will have 0 excuses as to why I can't go out the door and run. So that's kind of my life and professional life in a nutshell. And when the podcast for me, I kind of, I do that in the evenings. I just, a couple of weekday evenings, and I try to knock out 2 or 3 every week. And, so I get home from work, eat a little dinner, talk to the wife, and then turn on my computer and chat with people from, all over the place in my bedroom. So.
So does anybody else in your family run, or is this exclusively your thing?
My son grew up in it. So my son was real little. We would go trail running together. We would go running together, and it was so funny because we couldn't find him shoes. They did not make trail shoes for kids. And so we had to, my buddy owns a running store, and I'm like, what is a whatever size he was at the time in women's? Do they make what's the smallest women's shoe you can buy? And so he would order the smallest Brooks Cascadias in women's that you could order, which I think is women's size 6, I think is what it is, or a 5.5 or a 6. And so we would have to try, and because he was like, I don't want to wear pink. And so thank God they would make like a neon green Cascadia. So we would buy him, and he's going to kill me for saying this will embarrass him. We would buy him women's shoes. And of course they didn't make running shorts for boys either. They did not make running shorts for boys. So we had to get him women's running shorts. And then we got him the smallest Garmin you could get, like the Garmin 10. Yeah, remember that little tiny watch we had? And so we would go trail running together, and he has paced me at races, when he was 8 years old. And this year we ran actually a race together because he runs college cross country. And so this was fun that this year we signed up for a race together and did that. Of course, he finished way ahead of me, which is, I used to always, finish ahead of him and then go run back and get him, or we'd run together or whatever. And so it was so sweet in a way, bittersweet in a way, to be asking at the aid station, hey, did you see a kid in a black t-shirt running cross country runner? Did you see him? Yeah, he's about 30 minutes ahead of you. I'd be like, okay. And to have him wait for me and run me in, that was special this year. It was nice to be able to do.
That's really cool that he has crewed you and paced you, and now you're doing it together. Was it a cross country race that you were doing, or was this like an endurance event?
We did
cross country is not endurance.
We did a 25K together, and so it was in the community where he races cross country. So we found that there was a 25K near his university. And so I was like, we need to do this. And it was off season, so it was not like it was going to affect his training at all. And he ran the second fastest time on that course ever. Bad news was the guy who beat him ran the first fastest time on the course, and I came in somewhere smack dab in the middle. But that was really fun. All trails, it was off-road, gnarly stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah. Scott, I feel like I'm hogging all the questions. If you have a minute to jump in too.
You're not hogging at all. No, not at all. So let me ask you, Ryan, this. Like, when you run now, what's your running looking like now these days today?
I run every morning. I run 6 days a week, and I run, between 5 and 7 miles every morning, and then I'll do a long run on the weekends. I certainly do not get the 100 and 120 mile weeks that I used to get in, which I found now. Most coaches are saying that's stupid. Like, why are you doing that? I've talked to so many great running coaches that are like, you can really do this on 35 to 45 miles a week. That's real. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, no, if you're going to run, you got to have, if you're going to run a 50K, you've got to have a 25-mile long run. No, you can run a 50K and a half marathon. You can. Because it's entirely different, and it just, when you slow down and you throw food into the equation, that's the big thing that nobody can wrap their head around that. And that's the hardest thing for new ultra runners to understand is a tri-berry goo every 2 hours ain't going to do this, but you can do this by being smart with your fueling. Can you put down 280 calories an hour? And can you consistently put 280 calories down an hour? That's my magic number, is 280. And if you can, it's interesting how you will fade and rally, fade and rally, fade and rally. You can come back from so much, but the nutrition is such a missing piece of the puzzle for so many people that when you take road runners, especially who have done a marathon or a half marathon, and they're accustomed to just a couple of goos here and there, that when they transition over to the trail world, it's a completely different ball game, and they have the hardest time figuring out, okay, how do I do this again? Well, you slow down a little bit. You don't red line for 50K or 50 miles or 100 miles. You keep it in kind of this orange yellow area, and then you have to eat. You have to be able to eat while you run, which is very intimidating to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Totally. Do you have any races set up yet this year or next year? Or
And a backyard ultra from the first time this year. I did it. There's a great one out in Indiana called Grind on the Grid. Matt Cantrell, no relation to Gary Cantrell, at least that they're aware of, put that on. That was so cool to experience that format. And I realized that is such a different game as well. I'm going to do Mountain Masochist later on this year. I've got some ideas. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. Going out to Virginia, that'll be cool. And then I'd really love to get back into the 100-mile game in 2024. I think I'll have the time for it. I think I definitely have the passion for it again. I think it's anything after a 50K, you got to want it. And if your why is, I don't know what my why is, I haven't had a why for the longest time to do that, but I'm starting to get a why again. So I'm excited to explore those opportunities next year.
So I have two questions for you. We actually host and direct a Last One Standing challenge, a backyard ultra. And last year, so it started as a virtual event during the pandemic. Last year was the first year that we took it live, and we did the official 4.167 distance.
Yeah.
So it was a completely new experience for us too, seeing how that format works and watching athletes go through that process. So I would love to hear if you have words of wisdom to share, like, yeah, especially you're talking about nutrition and fueling and how important that is. That's a whole different level in the backyard ultra. So
it is. And the hardest thing to do, Lauren, for me was slow down. Because you get an hour to run 4.167 or whatever it dials out to. It is so hard to slow down. You can run yourself into the ground in those things because of some ego you have. Because if I don't know if it's just like there's this thing in you where you're like, I'm going to finish this lap first. Who cares? Like, who sits there and goes, hey, real quick, just so you know, I was the first finisher of yard 5 at the Grind on the Grid, and so slowing that down and it requires you to be more disciplined, and it requires you to be a little smarter with your fueling and just looking at, okay, so what do I do? How much time do I really need to bounce back and to get back on the course? And so you'll run that first lap and it's 42 minutes and you got 18 minutes to sit around. And if you're not getting your feet up and if you're not eating anything, you're just standing there waiting, that wears on you.
yeah.
And so I learned that when I go back next year to Grind on the Grid, it was such a great race. I have to go back, that I'm going to slow down. If I can get back to the start with 5 minutes to go, that's all I need. Just grab a water bottle, grab something to eat, and then you're set and ready to go. You don't need 18 minutes to sit around and do nothing.
Okay, that's exactly the question I had, is is it better to have less time in between loops? And I think that's what I keep hearing from more and more people as the backyard sport is growing a little bit, that's the strategy.
There's a great race that they do here in Nashville, in Franklin area. It's the Mid-State Mile, which Becca Jones and John Cox put that on. And there's even a great documentary on it on Amazon Prime right now. I think it's called Just 1 Mile.
Just one, yeah.
Yeah, it's 1.1 miles with 380 feet of gain in that 1.1 miles, and you do it every 20 minutes. And I remember my son wanted to sign up for that, and I was like, kid, you're a cross-country runner. You're insane. Fine, we'll sign you up for it. And he did it. He got like 33 miles or something. And, it was a great experience. And the one thing that I'll remember about that race is how kind and wonderful the ultra running community was to him, and how many great people he met out there and who he still is in contact with. But I remember the winner that year, and his course record's been broke, but is Justin Hamilton. He would always come in about 18 and a half minutes. When people were coming in 14 minutes, He was coming in 18 and a half minutes, grabbing something to eat, grabbing a water bottle, and then he was back on. And he set the course record just because he was being so disciplined. And I think it's so hard to be disciplined and to run that smart and not let your ego go, you got to run faster than this. This isn't running, this is walking, you know?
That's funny. Yeah, that makes total sense. And getting in that rhythm too. Like, you know, when we race continuous races, you know, beware the chair. You know, you don't want to spend too much time at the aid station. You don't want to spend too much time sitting. So but we don't maybe think to apply that in that kind of a format. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So you said that you're looking at the 100-mile distance again for next year. You've got a fire for it. So how long has it been since your last 100?
My last 100, I'd have to look it up on Ultra Sign Up. It was the Superior 100, which is such a great race. Beautiful race. It is. It's not easy. Boy, there's a lot of water on that course, which sucks. I want to say 2000. It's been a couple years. It's probably been 4 years since I ran 100. Okay.
Gotcha. The fire is still there to get back to it.
Yeah, I wonder if I'll get out there and go, this is stupid. Why did I decide to go back and do this? I was perfectly happy with my 4 finishes. And, you know,
probably at least once during the day, or you're doing it wrong, right?
I think so. But the great thing about the 100-mile distance is it's so great to test yourself and to live in this world of these ups and downs and what can you rally from when, you know, 10 miles ago you were stumbling walking and all of a sudden you're throwing down 10-minute miles again. 12. It's like it's so much fun, and really it indulges our inner spoiled brat in a way, because that 100-mile is all about you. You know, your friends have decided to stay in a crappy hotel and follow you and drive around the middle of nowhere to hand you peanut butter sandwiches in the middle of the night. You know, I mean, so it's for a moment,
it's like, your day.
Exactly. It's like, I am the most important person on planet Earth today, and I'm kind of okay with that.
Oh, that's funny. So all the way from the sprint triathlon to the 100-mile, what is your favorite distance?
I do like the 50K because you get to be out in the woods, but you're only really spending a quarter of the day out there, and then you have way more time for beer and burgers and what have you. So as of right now, it's the 50K, just because it's a distance that doesn't require much of you. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean it's easy by any stretch of the imagination, but the time requirement, the training requirement, and all of that stuff, it doesn't ask you to change your life that much. Training for a 100-miler asks you to change your life quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. What let's broaden it out a little bit of races that you have run yourself as a runner and races that you've been at, whether, you know, as a crew or a spectator. What, if you had to pick one, this is probably a terrible question, what's your favorite race that you have been to?
The favorite race that I've done, I think it was the Superior 100. I think Superior is a beautiful course. I did way better than I thought I would. I was like, how the hell did I top 10 this? You know, this is ridiculous. That is so beautiful. And the nice thing about it for me is that was in early September, and it is cold as all get out in Minnesota in early September. And I had trained all summer in the heat. And so to go from 90 degrees to a daytime high of 65, I felt like a god. Yeah. You know, I really did. That was really nice for me. The best race that I've been to, though, and I know this sounds cliche, and I'm sorry, folks, Western States has been an incredible experience, and I've never ran it. I've crewed and paced it twice. The first time I paced it was my buddy Travis, who he was like 23 hours and 45 minutes. And so being able to experience that race from the middle of the pack, it was great. Because, I mean, it's a spectacle. It's a spectacle for a reason. And when you're around that race and you're around the history and you're around the runners and you're in that area, it is everything that people say it is. I mean, it's a beautifully run race on a beautiful course. But to go back there was 2 years ago. I went back to Western States and I crewed and paced my buddy Kyle Curtin, who finished. He was M9 that year, so he finished ninth. To crew and pace that race, the first time in the middle of the pack, and then the second time in the front of the pack, that was two incredible experiences. And the race is entirely different, and you crew entirely different, and you pace entirely different when you're like in the front of the pack. Like you get, when you're in the middle, aid stations are always packed. You can't find a parking space. You're trying to find a place to set up your tent or whatever. You can't find anything. When you're at the front of the pack, you're the only person there. And you're like, hey, I see you guys just got that tent set up. There's 5 other people there waiting for you. And it was such an amazing experience. And even the pacing part, when you're pacing your buddy who's in the middle of the pack, you're like, all right, you're doing good. We just got to keep moving. Look at this. We've got plenty of time. We got plenty of time. When's the last time you ate something? And then you're telling stories, right? You're trying to get their mind off the fact that life sucks right now. And then when you're pacing someone in the front, you're like, oh God, first of all, I'm having a hard time keeping up because I am middle of the pack myself. And I'm like, okay. And then you're constantly scanning for headlights behind you because you do not want to be the guy. I'm like, I do not want to be the guy that gets him out of the top 10 because I'm sucking at pacing, right? And so it was Western States, and I've crewed and paced Leadville. They're 2 wonderful races, and I know they're out west, but they are worth the price of admission. They are beautiful races. But the Pinhoti 100 is probably the best 100 in the southern United States. It is everything you could possibly want. It's point to point. It's well supported. The course is beautiful. I mean, you're going through forests, and you're going up the side of these tall hills, and you're down in the hollers, and it is absolutely fantastic. And a good competition shows up for that race. So yeah, there's a lot of good ones. I think the Ozarks 100 is a point to point. That race is criminally underrated. I have no idea why that race doesn't sell out 30 seconds after it opens. It is a point to point course. It's in a perfect time of year, well supported. The guys who put it on are guys that have done hard rock for years and they know. Like sometimes you get into a race and you're like, oh, this is the race director's first time. And it's like, where's the water? So there's a lot of really, really good races. And I think there's some really great race directors that you can always count on them to put on a great race. David Tosh is one of them. John Harden is one of them. Jason Green is one of, there's so many I could name. There's so many great where you kind of know, like when you sign up for one of their races, you're in for a really, really good time. So we're blessed because there was a time when there was not much, but now if you can't find a race, then I don't know if you know how ultra sign up works because it's pretty easy to find stuff nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott's taking notes over here. He's thinking about his first 100 in the year ahead in 2024.
A good first one is, what do you want? Scott, do you want to do something that's got varying terrain, or do you want to do map? What are you thinking?
Give me something north of Virginia. So Maryland and north. Do you got any advice there? I'm stumping you. I know.
That's a good one. That's kind of outside my range of travel.
Well, then let's go with beginner 100, right?
Okay.
Somebody who is good with trail, good with roads, but just a beginner 100. Easy beginner 100.
Okay, there's a couple of them. The Yeti 100, which is in Damascus, Virginia. Jason Green puts on a great race. He's the real deal, folks. And the Jason that you hear in interviews, that's the real Jason. He's one of the most authentically wonderful people I've ever met. That's a good one. Also, the Hennepin 100, I've heard fantastic things about that. I've not run it, but I know Scotty Coomer from 10 Junk Miles just screams about how wonderful that is. And if he says it's good, that's good in my book. His race, the Badger 100 is a good one. That's in Wisconsin. Another one that I was thinking would be really good would be Tunnel Hill, which is in Vienna, Illinois, which is the one where all the speedsters come to. That's where Camille set the record that one year, and that's where Zach Bitter came out and set a record. And it's trails, it's crushed gravel, most of it, but it's well supported, and it's a nice, flat, fast race for you to kind of try it out for the first time. There's probably a couple I'm missing, but those seem to be the real good ones that I know of.
Perfect. Good to know.
Those are good recommendations. So, okay, this is probably an equally difficult question too. Which race is your favorite race? Do you have, of hundreds of people, I'm sure now that you have interviewed, do you have maybe favorite interview is the wrong way to go. That's like asking your favorite child. The most inspiring or most interesting interview that you've done that you've ever done.
Yeah, you're right. I've interviewed hundreds. I'm like trying to think of there's, what's funny is I'm always surprised. There's very few interviews where I leave it going like, well, that's going to suck, because they didn't give me anything. There's one that I had was last summer. There's a woman in Texas. Her name is Brandy Ray. And Brandy was a drug addict, in jail, looking at some serious prison time and for drugs and all that, and just was able to turn her life around and she turns her life around, finds ultra running, and then finds this community that supports her changing life. That story sticks out for me as one of my favorite, just because I was like, I didn't know what to expect. I just saw that she posted this mugshot of herself, right? She posted a mugshot, and then she posted a starting line photo holding the bib. And I'm like, I wonder if there's a story there. And it was such a great story. And there's a woman that I talked to, her name is Karen Sparks. Karen, here's a woman that, went through this horrible divorce and then has to deal with the fact that her husband murders her kids, falls apart, and then finds running and is inspired to, bring awareness to domestic violence and to help people. Ultra running got her through what she needed. I talked to a woman the other day. Her son died of carbon monoxide poisoning, and it was her running friends. Her running friends are the ones that brought her out of that depression, because they wouldn't let her be in that space. They were like, okay, enough. We got to figure out what to do. And so those have been really great for me. I've been so inspired by those. And then I always love talking to Andy Jones Wilkins, because we have a pretty good rapport and we kind of cut up on each other. So he's always fun to talk to. I was intimidated recently to talk to Courtney DeWalter, because I didn't want to screw that one up. There's pressure. You're like, I can't screw this up. I can't go in and ask stupid questions and just I've got to perform. The audience is she doesn't do many interviews. I have a responsibility to the audience to make sure that I ask the right questions and the right tone and all of that. And she was so fun. She was wonderful to talk to. Arlen Glick is coming to my house in a couple of weeks to pick up a bass guitar. He was so inspiring to listen to talk about someone who has dedicated his entire life to serving the two factions of people in society that we always forget: prisoners and people in nursing homes. He spent his whole life serving those that everybody would like to forget. He was a great story. And so, so I honestly rarely leave an interview not feeling great or inspired or wow, that's awesome.
I mean, this is why personally I'm such a big fan of your podcast is, to ask you that question. You're not telling me that your coolest interview was the fastest person who's ever, Courtney is really fast and really exceptional, but it's the interesting stories that are so inspiring to you, and also then to your listeners, that's why we follow is to hear all of the stories that you might not otherwise hear. Where do you find these stories? These are not famous runners. These are just people who are out doing their thing. Where do you find the stories?
I scour Ultra Sign Up and Facebook and Instagram, and I'm constantly looking for something. And I'll be honest with you, I have the best listeners in the world that will say like, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but you got to talk to this person. And so I get a lot of tips. It was much harder in the beginning to find these stories because I had to dig. But now it seems like it's what I'm kind of known for. So people are like, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but you got to talk to this person. So that's kind of, it's a lot of my listeners tipping me off, but also just looking at the internet and trying to figure out. And two, I'll see something that seems interesting, and then I'll kind of dig further into their social media just to see like, okay, what makes this person tick? Is there anything that tipped me off to? Is there more to this than just I like to run 60 miles a week and that sort of thing? You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's what makes it interesting is there's always a story there. It's not just the success and the race results and things like that. It's always what is behind the person, what got them to whatever it is that brought them to your attention.
Yeah. And I believe that, every runner has a story. They do. I mean, you don't come to a sport like this because you're just perfectly normal and just decided to run long distances. We all are bringing something to the starting line with us, whether it's dealing with a broken marriage and a broken heart or addiction. I find that a lot of us are broken in some way, and then like ultra running teaches us that we're not victims, we're survivors. And the community rallies behind that in a way more than really any other sport. We're not very judgy in the ultra running world. And, we're a place of misfits and where everybody truly does have a story. I've yet to meet, someone that just was like, oh, I just like running. So that's kind of my, I kind of, for the longest time, I was like, why do I do the Adventure Jogger? Like, what is the point of doing this podcast? And it was like, you know what? Because who like, you got to share these stories, right? I mean, it's like, why not? There's these great stories, people doing these incredible things. I interviewed a woman that had cancer, and was running ultras while she was still battling cancer. And so who's going to share those stories? And it's nothing against the elites. There's some very entertaining and funny elites who've got some great stories and some struggles in their lives. But I just find that 9 times out of 10, those folks that are the middle and the back of the pack, which makes up the bulk of the ultra running community, have a great story.
I love it. I think I don't want to take too much of your time. I feel like you've been really generous with us already, but we have our brand new podcast. We're trying to do like a final 10K. So we have 6 kind of wrap up questions to bring us to the finish here. Scott, do you want to start with yours?
Yeah, let's go. So Ryan, headphones or no headphones on a run?
It depends. Some days I need them. Some days I don't. Some days I want to listen to a podcast. Some days I want to listen to music. Some days I don't. I never want to be the person who's like, I never do headphones or I always do headphones, because some days I need them and some days I don't. And as a podcast person, I certainly do not want to start the trend of no headphones. That's kind of my bread and butter.
Perfect. So we already hit on a couple of this with the top races and 100 milers on the East Coast. Give me your top race. Doesn't matter the distance. It has to be ultra distance on the East Coast.
Best that I've run or best that I've heard things about or covered?
That you would recommend.
Okay. There is a great race in it's an outskirts of Chattanooga, and it is called the Upchuck 50K. And the Upchuck 50K is as old school as it gets. There is no frills. Folks, if you love frills, this is not the race for you. They write your number on your leg in a Sharpie. They put you on a school bus because the race ends at the senior center in Saudi Daisy, Tennessee, at the Senior Center. And there's a little pavilion at the Senior Center in Saudi Daisy. That's where it ends. You hop on a school bus and they take you to the start. There are 2 aid stations, one at 7.5 and one at 16. That's it. And to finish the race, you have to get to the Senior Center, get back to the pavilion. You have to tap the garbage can, and then you have to write your time down on a piece of poster board. There is no live tracking. There is no bibs. It is so old school, but it is such a great race. It is so good. The Upchuck 50K, I'm going to say community, just everything about it is fantastic. It is no frills. It is old school. It is people who love running do this race. It's not something you do because the buckle looks great. You don't get a medal. You don't. You get it. And the cool thing is you get whatever, because one of the guys involved, Matt Sims, works for Patagonia. You get whatever he can find. Like the year I ran it, I got a beach towel. I got a Patagonia beach towel with the logo on it. So
that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I think yes, there's a place for the race with all the frills, but there's also a place in your life for the ones where it's just runners loving running, just enjoying time in the backwoods.
Okay, nice. All right, the 5K question.
Okay,
you have 3 people to crew you, dead or alive, famous, not famous, in an ultra. Who are you grabbing to crew you for 3 people in your crew?
Not my typical group of friends. I have to pick famous people.
or not famous. It could be not famous. Yep.
Okay.
You pick.
Okay. So I'll always stick with my buddies. I've got Patrick, Travis, and Jeff. But for the sake of this podcast, I will go with the famous realm. I think if you want to have a great crew chief, it would have to be former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. TR would be an ultra runner if it existed during his time. Like if you want to read about a guy who is like the ultra spirit, it's TR. Here's a guy who would make his cabinet follow him around on the trails as he would hike having meetings. I can't remember which president it was. I think it maybe was the Prime Minister of Canada was visiting, and so they went for a walk to the Potomac. And then he decided, you know what, let's just take a dip in the Potomac. So here he was, the president of the United States and the prime minister of Canada were skinny dipping in the Potomac in like the winter, just because like, why not? Right. He was a brown belt in judo. He had a boxing ring set up in the White House so he could box in his spare time. Like you would want that guy on your crew, right? Right? You totally would.
I just got a complete history lesson. I didn't know any of that.
He is the most fascinating person on planet Earth. Like you think about it, I know the term president is very loaded nowadays and people get real angry no matter what you say. He was someone from a different time. One of the things I loved about him was every New Year's, he would open the doors to the White House and he would shake as many people's hands that would wait in line. So on New Year's Day, people would line up outside the White House. He would just stand and shake people's hand and say, "How are you?" all day long. And until the day was over, they'd shut the doors and they'd move forward. That's endurance right there. Talk about time on your feet, So he's on there. I think Tom Hanks, you got to have Tom Hanks on your crew because Tom Hanks is going to make you feel better, right? Like it's hard not to feel good when you're around Tom Hanks. He'll tell you some kind of story or something. Like you'd be like, "Oh man, he starts the bad miles. I need Hanks in here to make me laugh." And
he's probably going to narrate it really well too.
Yes. And final person. This is the person you would need to get you through the really rough miles. Would be Mick Jagger, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones. Because he's just so energetic. I mean, can you imagine hopping down the trail and he's just prancing and pointing everywhere? Look at those trees. Look at the runners. We need to go. Like that would be like the ultimate crew right there. So TR, Tom Hanks, and Mick Jagger. That's my dream crew.
Those are excellent choices. I love all of this. Okay, shifting gears, the
Mhm.
the last 5K.
All right.
Okay, what is one quirky thing that you always do before a race?
Um, that's a good. Well, I'm really concerned about my number two. Like for whatever reason, I do not want to get out there. And I have a buddy of mine who seriously, we run every morning, and he has to between 1 and 1.5 miles every morning. It's like, but I just don't want to. I don't want to get started and then have to stop. I'm really adverse to number twoing in the woods. So I'll try to. I'll sit there as long as it takes to get it out. I'll get as early as I can. I'll drink more coffee than I probably should have because I just don't want to have to two the first half of a race. I want it all gone. I want an empty stomach. I want empty bowels. I want all of that for whatever reason. Even though I bring, even on my morning runs, I bring paper towel with me in my shorts. I never need it ever because I will not go on that run unless I've had that experience. So
That is probably the best quirky pre-race routine. That's important. You don't want to use paper towels. That sounds terrible.
you do want to, well, if you have to. The God honest truth is people are kind of spoiled with wipes. And first of all, do not bring toilet paper when you're running. Your sweaty ass will tear that toilet paper up. It will not work. You need Bounty. You got to get some Bounty, the quicker picker upper, and that's what you do. You grab 3 sheets, you fold it up real nice, stick it in one of those pockets of your shorts, and the quicker picker upper will never let you down.
There you have tips from from the woods. Okay, all right. Favorite running snack? Let's say either on the run or like pre or post.
Okay. As far as like food's concerned, I used to be just the standard. I used to like rotate between 2 gels. I used to rotate between lemon lime goos and salted caramel goos. Those are the 2 that I wouldn't go anywhere further than that. But then I saw Spring Energy and a buddy passed me a speed nut and I thought something called speed nut is going to taste awful. It was so good. I was like, oh my God. And then I saw the price of them and I was like, oh God, wow. But pickles are a game changer. Pickles are good.
That's a good answer. Good on both fronts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last question.
All right.
If you could give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
This is a tough one. I think what I would say to my 20-year-old self is I would say, don't take life so seriously. It's all meaningless. Don't get worked up in it. Just enjoy the ride. You're in control of so much less than what you think. Like we all think we have so much more control in our lives than we actually have, and you see, and I spent, God, 10 years of my life paddling in the stream, just against the current, just trying to, to get things right. And I wasn't in a good space. And I would just say, remember, if life truly is a stream, right? Just picture life as this stream you go down. You get in at some point, that's when you're born. You get out at some point, that's when you die. But look at it this way. It's much more enjoyable if you just get in an inner tube, crack open a beer, and just watch the world go by and just see where everything takes you, right? Like you have no idea where you're going. Or you can get in there and fight it and be miserable. Just hop on the inner tube, crack a beer, and enjoy it.
That was fantastic advice
Love it.
and a good closing point there too. So Ryan, for our listeners who are not already familiar with you, where can they find you and the Adventure Jogger podcast?
First of all, don't be afraid of the J word. I've heard people say I won't listen to your podcast because I'm not a jogger. The whole story behind that is I heard somebody at a race dismissively refer to all the people in the back of the pack as adventure joggers. And I was like, I love that name. So don't let the J word fool you. But you can find me at theadventurejogger.com, Adventure Jogger podcast on Facebook, the Adventure Jogger on Instagram as well. The podcast is available everywhere. I'm housed on Spotify now. No, I don't have Joe Rogan money, but you can find me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts. Just search for The Adventure Jogger. And I found that if you type in adventure, once you get to the V, it automatically shows that I'm there. So you only have to type to the V of adventure to get to me.
They cut it real short.
They did, yeah.
All right. We are the More Miles podcast. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts or at moremilestogo.com. And we are on social media at More Miles Run Coaching on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. All right. Thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us. It's been a real privilege. We appreciate your time.
Lauren, Scott, this has been fun. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right.